Early on Sunday morning, September 18, 2011, a resident of the Yugo-Zapadny district in Yekaterinburg, Russia, went out to walk his dog. The streets were still deserted, so the man lit a cigarette and loosened the leash. When he approached the stadium of the nearest school, he let his dog run free, as he always did. But for some reason, this time the dog behaved unusually. With its tail tucked, it cautiously moved forward, sniffing tensely. About 30 meters from some pile of rags, or so it seemed to the man from a distance, the dog stopped and howled desperately while the anxious owner came closer. What had looked from afar like crumpled clothing now took on the shape of a human figure. The first thing that came to mind was that it was just another drunk homeless person. But when this random passerby took a closer look at the body lying on the grass of the school stadium, he later admitted that he almost threw up from the shock. After that, everything went as it usually does in such cases. A call came into the Verkhisetsky district police duty office. The anxious eyewitness reported the terrible discovery, and an investigative team was dispatched to 25 Belorechanskaya Street, Yekaterinburg. You are on the Strashnota channel, and today's video is about a tragedy and evil that remained unpunished for a long time. Like, dislike and leave comments under this video, but only after you watch it to the end. Also, subscribe to the Strashnota Telegram channel. There's completely different content there, as well as additional materials that didn't make it onto YouTube. Also, subscribe to Boosty and Patreon. These are platforms you can join for free. These are my backup platforms in case of unexpected or even expected takedowns and bans. People also often ask me, Kirill, what's going on with your nose? I've never told anyone, but I'll let you in on a secret. There's nothing unusual here. I just decided to make my nose bigger. So soon it will be. It'll grow. I'll take off the bandage and it'll look like this. Well, now to the point. The girl I'm going to tell you about today was born into a family that was hardly stable. Nothing particularly terrible. Her parents lived like thousands of our fellow citizens do. Both liked to drink from time to time, and neither achieved anything special in life. The father got by with odd jobs, and the mother raised the children. They lived in the grandmother's apartment on the mother's side. Olya spent her early years happy, not really thinking much about the relationships in her own family. Olga Medvedeva was an average student in her class. Not too diligent, but not the worst either. But starting from the 5th grade, Olya had to become independent, much earlier than her classmates, because her parents liked to drink and her grandmother worked and couldn't always help. In high school, the girl dropped to getting C's. She started skipping classes and tried drinking with friends. Everyone who knew her associated these changes with some bad crowd she got involved with. Despite this, Olya was responsive, sociable, and loved being at the center of things, but she didn't trust just anyone with her feelings and secrets, and she had things to hide. The thing is, Olya had recently acquired a secret that she definitely couldn't share with anyone. Not her parents, not even her friends or peers. Later, her homeroom teacher recalled, "She changed a lot about a year ago. It even seemed like she started smoking, but she never admitted to it. I tried to talk some sense into her, but it was no use." Everything finally changed in her difficult teenage years, a challenging time for any adolescent, and on top of that, her father left the family. The conflict between her mother and father, and the lack of support from loved ones, made the girl look for warmth elsewhere, as often happens in such cases. But for Olya Medvedeva, this search came at too high a price. That weekend didn't go well. On Friday evening, 14-year-old Olya suddenly developed a high fever. According to her friends, she didn't like being at home when her mother was drinking, and in recent years that happened more and more often. The only person in the family the girl truly loved was her older brother Mikhail, who always tried to spoil his sister a little. But he worked a lot, including on weekends, and on that day he wasn't home either. Olya wasn't always able to shut herself off from her hysterically yelling parents behind the door of her room. Her drunk mother, before passing out, would persistently come to her with constant lectures and banal questions. Besides, in that state, her mother would always try to ask if she had seen her father, insistently question her about the details of his life, throw dirty insults, and at the same time was terribly jealous of Olya because she spent time with his new partner, Natalia. There was a reason for this. Her daughter would often visit her father at his new lover's apartment, spend a lot of time there, and even stay overnight, which really infuriated her unhappy mother. And this time, everything happened the same way it usually did, and Olga decided to go to her school friends, despite not feeling well. She asked her grandmother for something for her fever, but only got tea with raspberries, because there was no extra money for medicine. Then she asked her brother. She called from her grandmother's phone, since hers was stolen a week ago. Mikhail didn't say no to his sister and bought her efferalgan, but when he came back from work late in the evening, Olya was already asleep, and on Saturday morning she found the medicine she needed by her bed. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, September 17, 2011, Galina Alexandrovna saw her daughter in the hallway, already dressed and with makeup on, ready to leave the house at any moment. But she didn't let her go because the local doctor was supposed to come soon. The unhappy girl had to get up and wait for the doctor to arrive, who came at the same time as Elena, who used to leave for her part-time job on Saturdays. It was already about 3 in the afternoon. The mother peeked into her daughter's room, answered the doctor's routine questions, and went to the kitchen. After that, Olya still slipped out of the house just for an hour to take a walk, as she told her grandmother. And she got a strict instruction to return home no later than 8, but she came back an hour later, at 9, accompanied by one of her school friends. Mikhail, her brother, was working late again. Their mother, after another drinking session, was sleeping on the couch, and their grandmother was busy in the kitchen. "Grandma," the girl called from the hallway without even taking off her shoes. "Can I stay overnight at Yulia's? Why would you do that?" Galina Alexandrovna protested. "You're sick and you don't have a phone. How am I supposed to find you later?" But the assertive Olya knew exactly how to press on the sore spots. She replied to her grandmother's arguments by saying she was already feeling better, there was nothing to do at home anyway, except watch her alcoholic mother. And at Yulia's place they were going to eat pizza. And she left, taking her grandmother's phone so they could at least reach her on it. And Grandma, as always, gave in. If only she knew how this sleepover at a friend's house would end for her only granddaughter. She would have locked all the doors and not let her go anywhere. But unfortunately, no one can predict the future, not even psychics. Although, write in the comments what you think. Are psychics really able to predict the future? And if they are, then why aren't they making billions, for example, on futures, on Bitcoin, on some kind of bets, or just simply on the dollar exchange rate? Back at Yulia's apartment, the girls really did start cooking, but after the pizza was eaten, Olya got bored and wanted some action. She left her friend without telling her family anything, and spent the rest of the evening with her buddies, teenagers just like herself. Of course, the group had some booze too. Someone brought vodka, someone else went out for some beer. The guys hung out on the street for a long time, not far from their homes, and stayed there well past midnight, because that September the weather was gorgeous, and the nights were still warm, even in Yekaterinburg. Olya's friend, 8th grader Yulia, later said that everyone only started to leave around 3 or 4 in the morning. Around 3:30, Olya said she was bored and that she was going to Aunt Natasha's. She didn't want to go home, she was afraid her grandmother would be angry with her. We offered to walk her home, but Olya said she would get there herself. And indeed, after such a wild evening, Olga didn't want to go home at that hour, in that state, anticipating a negative reaction from her grandmother and mother. Instead, she decided to go to the apartment of Natalia Petukova, her father's common-law wife. And this is where things start to get most confusing for those who will later investigate this case. After all, at that time, the girl's father had already left his partner. A week ago they had a serious argument. But for some reason, Olya still went there so early in the morning instead of going home or to her father. What made her act that way? The reason was the very secret that the girl tried so hard to hide from everyone. Only her closest friends were let in on it. Olya's secret was named Clara. It all started in the very apartment where Olenka had been living for the past 2 years. At first, the girl would come there because she missed her dad. Even though the atmosphere and customs of this house were not much different from her own, she felt different here. More free and relaxed. The owner of the apartment, Aunt Natasha, as Olya called her, worked as a nurse in one of the city's maternity hospitals. And in her free time, she also really liked to have a drink. Of course. But unlike Olya's mother, she did it completely differently. It was fun and on a grand scale. There were always some acquaintances and friends hanging out in her apartment, bringing more and more new people with them. She didn't even know most of them herself, but her doors were always open for drinking buddies. The teenage girl really liked this kind of life. It seemed interesting and exciting to her. Write in the comments. Would you like such a life? And what do you know about cases and the fates of people who live like this? One way or another, the people who came to Natalia's apartment treated Olya as an equal. They didn't lecture her about life or nag her like relatives or teachers. All kinds of people came to Petukova's place. There were simple drinkers, musicians strumming guitars, and some really interesting personalities. And even people who weren't straight. One of those who attracted Olya was Alexander Temlyakov, nicknamed Clara. This character was much older than Olga, already close to 30. He worked as a bartender at a place where guys like him would secretly gather. To the lively and passionate girl, Alexander Clara seemed like a true romantic hero, especially since he was very talkative and knew an endless number of stories. It was said that whenever he had a drink, he would tell every passerby a tragic story about his ill-fated romance. They said that his beloved girlfriend left him, and after that he changed which gender he was interested in. Olya's closest friend and classmate, Veronika Makeeva, one of the few people who knew about this relationship, said that Olya was simply obsessed with this Clara, and at every opportunity she tried to be near him. What kind of relationship they actually had, how close they were, no one knew for sure. The girl didn't even tell her best friend such details. One day, Olya was sitting at Clara's bar. They were drinking together as usual. This grown man saw nothing wrong with offering 14-year-old Olya a drink. And suddenly Elena Vitamskogo burst into the bar furious. Olya's mother, someone from her friends, eventually spilled the beans about this relationship, and the rumors reached the teachers and then the girl's family. That's how secrets get told. According to another version, Olya's father himself told his ex-wife that their daughter was seeing an adult man. In a fit of anger, Elena took a taxi, something she had never done before, and rushed to that bar. But when she saw the very self-confident man, Vitamsky, she cooled down a bit. He responded to all her accusations so skillfully that soon the woman herself no longer knew what in fact she could reproach him for. Well, yes, he knows her daughter. And how could he not know her when she is constantly visiting Natalia Petukova, his landlady? Recently, he and his friend named Andrei have been renting a room from her. He didn't lay a finger on your daughter, Clara said to the indignant mother. I have no interest in women at all. And I didn't sell her any alcohol. She brought a bottle with her. She wasn't going to call the police on me just to have her hauled off to the lockup. Anyway, Elena left the bar confused and Olya flatly refused to go home with her. Olya has always had a strong-willed character. She knew how to get what she wanted from a young age. And this time too, her mother was powerless and everything stayed the same. Olya kept spending time with an adult man of questionable behavior, insisting that there was nothing going on between them. But soon, first among the teenagers and then throughout the whole school, dirty rumors started spreading that Olya was seen kissing that very same Clara. Immediately, people started spreading rumors that she had been sleeping with him for a long time and that his supposed interest in men was just a cover, and that she had also been seen in the neighborhood with other older guys. However, the person at the center of this quiet scandal didn't react to any of it, and for some reason no one asked her directly, probably knowing they might get into trouble. They were mostly afraid of Olga's mysterious adult company. But they kept whispering and discussing the juicy topic for a very long time. For this reason, among others, the friends didn't insist when Olya abruptly demanded that they leave her alone and not walk her home from the party. The guys thought that some older acquaintances would meet her instead. But on the way to Natalia Petukova's apartment, someone was lying in wait for the girl she never expected to meet at night. It was that same dog walker who discovered the bloodied, half-naked body of Olga Medvedeva. He called the police during his early morning walk. The investigators, just as shocked by the gruesome discovery as the man who found her, cordoned off the area and first of all informed the school principal about everything. The head of the press service of the Sverdlovsk main directorate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Valery Gorelik, said in his interview, "Even the detectives, who have seen a lot of terrible things in their time, were shocked by the brutal cruelty with which someone sadistically abused and killed Olya." And in the official report of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, it was stated dryly, a body was found with stab wounds, the mammary glands and genitals cut out. The police were also struck by another important detail. Olya's relatives didn't search for her on their own until the police informed them. They were informed about the incident closer to noon. She was with someone. She could call from her friend's place. "Why would we call her?" said the girl's mother, answering the investigators' questions. And indeed, there were no calls to the phone of Galina Alexandrovna Podukova, the grandmother of the deceased Olga Medvedeva, that Sunday. According to the investigators, the tragedy could have been prevented if Olya's parents had properly fulfilled their social responsibilities. Certainly, with proper supervision, this could have been avoided. She was going to her stepmother on that fateful day after 3 o'clock in the morning. The teenagers who were near the murder scene at that time were charged for drinking alcohol, and their parents were fined for failing to fulfill their parental duties. All the shocking details of Olya's death were not made public right away. At first, the police only confirmed the discovery of the body and gave brief information about the girl herself and the last day of her life. Much later, forensic experts revealed the horrifying details. The criminal ambushed the girl when she was walking drunk through the school stadium in a deserted, poorly lit area. Suddenly attacking his victim, he knocked her to the ground and cut her clothes with a sharp object, presumably a knife. Some of the victim's clothing was found next to her half-naked body. The girl's body was badly mutilated, with numerous visible signs of beating and stab and slash wounds. There were more than 40 penetrating wounds to the skin. Judging by the nature of the blows, the perpetrator was violating her while cutting her. After taking the victim's life, the attacker cut off her breasts and removed her external genitalia with the same object used to inflict the wounds. As is often the case in such high-profile violent crimes, senior officials put strong pressure on the investigative team in Yekaterinburg, demanding that the case be solved quickly. But in the case of Olga Medvedeva, this turned out to be an almost impossible task. The first theory put forward by the investigators caused a mixed reaction from the public. Bewilderment, irritation, and even almost hysterical laughter could be heard in the endless conversations and rumors that swept through the city. The thing was, the first suspect was her father's partner, 43-year-old Natalia Petukova, in whose apartment the deceased used to spend so much time. The reason for such an assumption was an event too ambiguous not to attract everyone's attention. Almost all of Olya's relatives came to the talk show on Channel 1, Let Them Talk, literally 2 days after she was killed. Additional materials, by the way, will be on Telegram. If interested, come take a look. Mother Yelena Yuryevna, sitting in a black headscarf with a worn-out face, maternal grandmother Galina Podukova, who looks very calm and unflappable, and brother Mikhail, who answers opponents' questions with clear wording. And even Olya's other grandmother, Lydia Ivanovna Medvedeva. Instead of mourning their deceased daughter and granddaughter, this whole family came to television and unanimously blamed the hated Natalia Petukova for taking her life. By that time she had already written a confession. The officials in uniform, pressured from above, did everything quickly. The relatives and loved ones of the deceased heaped a whole bucket of abuse on the suspect on air. The grandmother on her father's side even called her a real beast, assuring the public that Olya went to protect her father from Natalia and to settle things over the money she had taken from him. By the way, Vyacheslav Medvedev himself turned out to be the only one of Olya's relatives who did not come to this show. But the crafty journalists still managed to interview him as well, and excerpts from this interview were shown during the broadcast. This man, who had never really worked anywhere, made a negative impression on the viewers. It was obvious that he drank and didn't seem particularly upset. The older brother, who according to his own words had never seen Natalia in his life, also claimed that their father's partner stabbed his sister out of jealousy and malice. And supposedly it was those very tenants who helped her deal with the girl and abused her before her death. Konstantin Farbarov, the head of the investigative committee for the Verk-Isetsky district of Yekaterinburg, also agreed with the family's opinion. He said, the investigation had strong grounds for detaining Natalia. I consider the motive for taking the girl's life to be the suspect's personal animosity toward her. While the entire family of Olya Boyko was appearing on the show, her battered body was kept in a specialized morgue of the investigative committee's expert department, and none of her relatives were even allowed to see it. That's exactly what Olya's mother said at the very beginning of the program. We haven't seen Olya, they won't show her to us. Later, during interrogations, much of what Olya's relatives had said was confirmed. 2 weeks before she lost her life, Natalia and Olya's father had a serious argument. There were plenty of reasons for conflict between the partners. And the constant visitors in Natalia's apartment, which greatly annoyed Vyacheslav, Olga's father. And the fact that 2 of them had recently moved into one of the rooms. The overly hospitable hostess, who by that time had either quit the maternity hospital herself or had been asked to leave because she loved to drink a little too much. Natalia's colleagues said that she was often late for her shifts and would show up to work either drunk or suffering from a hangover. Vyacheslav also didn't like that his new girlfriend didn't have much affection for her stepdaughter. According to him, Petukova was constantly scolding the girl, calling her a little slut, and was very jealous of her friends and tenants, and even of her own father, but for a different reason. The woman felt that he was giving his daughter too much attention and extra money, thereby neglecting herself. During the interrogations, Vyacheslav Medvedev also accused the woman of stealing a rather large sum of money that he kept in his apartment, and Petukova took it from his belongings while he was at work. And after that, she put the bags of her tiresome lover outside the door, and he supposedly did not find the money in them. And one more detail. On the eve of her death, and 2 days before it, Olya came to Natalia to confront her, demanding the return of the money stolen from her father, which was confirmed by other witnesses who were in Petukova's apartment that day. This seemed enough for the investigation to accuse Natalia of the brutal killing of her partner's daughter. Law enforcement officers were not even bothered by what seemed to be the most obvious contradiction. No matter how much hatred Natalia felt toward Olya, she simply could not have abused her at the bottom. This was exactly what puzzled the people of Yekaterinburg the most, as they were surprised by this turn in the investigation. And then, right on time, Petukova herself gave a confession, saying that she was jealous of Olya because of her husband. That is, she was jealous of Olya because of Olya's own biological father. Then Natalia very convincingly, in vivid detail and with all the specifics, described at the crime scene exactly how she dealt with her stepdaughter. And she even demonstrated on a mannequin how she delivered the stab wounds. Well, as usual, law enforcement officers cheerfully reported the successful solving of the case. Valery Gorelik, head of the press service of the main directorate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs for the Sverdlovsk region, soon proudly told journalists at a press conference that it took Sverdlovsk detectives about a day and a half to solve the girl's murder. And senior assistant to the head of the department, Justice Captain Alexander Shulga, added, "This woman was one of those who were checked by investigators from the very beginning for involvement in the brutal and audacious crime." While journalists relished the details, which satisfied both the investigators and the victim's family, law enforcement officers threw all their efforts into searching for accomplices since, as they eventually had to admit, there were indeed others involved. The only thing that didn't fit into this clear picture was the fact that Petukova could hardly have managed to drag the body of the mutilated schoolgirl out of the apartment by herself, where she allegedly took the life of her stepdaughter, to the school stadium, since the distance from there to that spot was at least 300 meters. Even forensic experts studied the alleged crime scene. According to them, the stair landing had been thoroughly cleaned at the time of the inspection. However, a couple of bloodstains were found on the stairs in the entrance. However, it was never determined whose blood it was. But at the school stadium, where, according to the initial report from the forensic experts, the killing took place, there was actually too little blood for such multiple wounds. But the law enforcement officers handled this issue as well. They decided that the rain that fell during the night had washed away all the blood traces. But in Petukova's apartment, they conducted as many as 3 searches with a thorough examination of the alleged crime scene. But all of it was in vain. No traces. The belongings of the 2 guys who rented a room from Petukova were examined especially thoroughly, as was mentioned later. But this lead also didn't go anywhere. In general, there were too many oddities in this case. Alexander Temlyakov, who it would seem should have become one of the suspects, was not taken into custody. As the investigation found out, he had an ironclad alibi for that night. The investigation did not disclose exactly what it was, and nothing could be found out about it. Although Olya's friends and classmates told the detectives everything they knew about Olya's relationship with Clara, and Veronika Makiva, Olya's close friend whom the deceased trusted with all her secrets, added a few more details to the known facts. The night before her death, Olya told me that she already regretted getting involved with that group of adults. She said that she thought there would be freedom there, but it turned out to be nothing but problems. By the way, these problems came to light later, from a completely unexpected direction, and only after Olya's death. Veronika, who also appeared on the TV show, shed light on that dark story between Olya and Alexander Temlyakov. According to her, when these rumors got back to Clara, he just went mad because he thought that Olya herself had told her little group about their relationship, wanting to seem more grown up and experienced. And he was strongly against anyone knowing about it, because he cultivated a reputation as someone with a non-traditional sexual orientation. Despite this, the investigative committee either couldn't or didn't want to put real pressure on Temlyakov, and he avoided any charges. Because of all these completely unclear inconsistencies in the rather complicated case, many people who were following the investigation expressed their dissatisfaction. In front of someone. What about the stepmother and the girl? She took her life, and not only that, she also mutilated her, carried the body out of the house, walked through the city with it, even if it was at night, and dumped it in a field near the school, where there could easily have been witnesses. It would make sense if she had taken her life at home, tried to dismember her, take her out and hide her. Then there should have been traces of blood in the house, bloody rags, and finally the murder weapon. And this woman must be violently insane, in a period of acute psychosis. Another dark case, but for some reason, neither the police nor the experts nor the investigative committee were concerned with such questions. However, the investigators who accused Natalia Petukova and had already closed the criminal case made one significant mistake. They didn't wait for the final expert examination results. But the forensic experts determined that the girl was brutally sexually assaulted precisely at the time of her death, and it was done by an unknown man, since his biological fluids were found on Olya's body. They did not match any of the samples taken from other suspects, including Alexander Temnyakov. Was it a coincidence or not? But at the same time, Natalia Petukova also spoke up, claiming that she was forced to confess. So it seemed that the criminal case, which was already ready for trial, had to be sent back for further investigation. The fabricated charges against Petukova were quickly hushed up, and once again there were no suspects left in the case. And then some new absurd nonsense began. The press, which had already spread the sensational news about the stepmother maniac all over the area, started publishing retractions in batches, claiming that Petukova had falsely accused herself while being very drunk after another binge. And of course that remained unanswered, with supposedly no pressure from anyone. Whether this is actually true and why she did it has not been determined and is unclear. One thing is known for sure. It was the investigators who accused Natalia who also petitioned the court to release her from the pretrial detention center. Alexander Shulga, the senior assistant to the head of the investigative department for Sverdlovsk region, said the following: "Despite her confession and the statements she gave after verifying her testimony at the scene, it was decided not to petition the court to place the suspect in custody." Immediately after that, some relatives of Petukova, who appeared out of nowhere, gave an interview and told journalists that the police put a lot of pressure on her to force a confession and report to their superiors that the case had been solved. There were allegedly even fresh bruises on Natalia's body. There were traces of fresh bruises on Natalia's body. Since they were all free public defenders, they told journalists that after sleeping it off in the cell, Petukova came to her senses and refused to give testimony. Violetta Redmond had no more proof of her guilt. Natalia's body showed bruises. The judge, seeing this turn of events, granted 72 hours. Часа на сбор дополнительных улик. And when the time was up, they themselves asked not to extend Petukova's preventive measure. However, even her relatives were not allowed to see her. The police, under the pretense of concern for her life, kept Natalia somewhere in a secret apartment. When the accused herself appeared in public, she said that she hadn't even seen her stepdaughter on that fateful night. All evening before Olya was killed, Petukova was drinking heavily, then passed out as usual, and in the morning she was very surprised when she opened the door to the police officers who took her into custody. And the school stadium where Olya Medvedeva's body was found soon became a place of real pilgrimage. People brought flowers, soft toys, and lit candles in the evenings. The students and parents of 8th grade Class B collected 16,000 rubles for Olya's funeral. The Petukova mix-up was left in the past, and the detectives had to continue their search, but now in a slightly different direction. The next ones to get caught were Medvedeva's friends, who were under 18, especially those who were with her on that ill-fated night. The deceased was very sociable, so they had to check several hundred people. But having grabbed onto this lead, the investigators once again went down the wrong path. It turned out that some of the phone numbers the detectives were working with no longer belonged to their original owners. As a result, both precious time and effort were wasted. And for the second time, the investigation reached a dead end. For a long time, far too long, the detectives had no new leads at their disposal. It seemed like this was already a complete cold case. In 2016, the police seemed desperate. Surprisingly, they even promised a reward of 1 million rubles for information about the killing of Olga Medvedeva. Seeing that the situation was not changing and the public was concerned, the Prosecutor General's office and the chairman of the Investigative Committee of Russia, Alexander Bastrikin, were forced to personally oversee this case. The head of the Investigative Committee of the Sverdlovsk region was briefed by staff on the progress of the investigation twice a day. But even that did not help the investigation. Throughout the entire investigation period from 2011 to 2017, the case was repeatedly handed over from one official to another. A total of 7 investigators were replaced, but this did not add any accused persons to the case. Everyone was considered a suspect, from the victim's acquaintances to those previously convicted of similar crimes or simply mentally ill individuals registered with the authorities. A hypothesis emerged that the girl might have been killed by an unknown maniac. The Yekaterinburg police sent inquiries about similar murders to other regions. Representatives of the regional office of the investigative committee gathered journalists again. Our investigators traveled to different regions of the Russian Federation and study materials from similar criminal cases there, as well as significant evidence, to determine whether they might be part of a series committed by the same perpetrator. Time passed, but there were still no real suspects in the case. Investigators began to closely observe everyone who, in their opinion, behaved suspiciously. For example, 2 guys from Olya's call records aroused their suspicion because they failed to appear for questioning for a long time. The next investigator, Sergei Maltsev, who inherited the cold case in 2016, told journalists about this theory. This situation made us very wary. It made us lean toward considering them as suspects. Later, it turned out that one of them had gone to the capital and was communicating not with the victim, but with her mother, and the second had long ago lost the SIM card registered in his name. In fact, it was being used by an acquaintance of the victim. It was Maltsev who paid the most attention, even to the smallest, seemingly insignificant details, and in the end, solved this complicated case. Over the years of investigations, not only did the investigators change, but so did the methods of forensic expertise. Maltsev was handed an already massive criminal case, about 100 volumes in size. By the end of the investigation, it had grown to over 350 volumes. Back in 2011, forensic experts were able to collect DNA samples of the suspected perpetrator from Olya's body. But since the capabilities of genetic forensic analysis at that time left much to be desired, the samples remained unused for a long time. But in the end, it was this very technology that, 6 years later, helped catch the real perpetrator. At that time, everything that could theoretically lead to the perpetrator or witnesses was collected from the crime scene: bottles, cigarette butts, chewing gum, and cans. However, no eyewitnesses were ever found. But when DNA testing was improved and reached a new level, the investigation began to pursue this line of inquiry aggressively, eventually collecting genetic material from almost all the men in the area. In total, they checked over 3,000 genetic profiles and conducted more than 1,000 different examinations. More than 7,000 people were questioned about their involvement in the deaths. The alibis of 4,500 men were checked, over 3,000 documents were studied, and the records of more than 3 million mobile phone connections were examined. Such colossal work was not in vain. In the end, they managed to find a DNA match. It turned out that Olin Palash had been literally under the investigators' noses all this time. He lived just 2 houses away from her school. But it took almost 6 years to find him. This only happened in May 2017. The newly accused man in Olga's killing was 47 years old, and at the time of her death, he was 41. The detectives went door to door among the male residents of the neighborhood, which was about 7,000 people, and they came to the perpetrator's place 3 times, but never found him at home. And only in March 2017 did the investigators manage to determine the suspect's whereabouts. Well, the suspect turned out to be a certain Andrei Chernyaev. This man worked as a surveyor in his youth, then served in the army, and twice tried to get a higher education. He enrolled in a military school and a regular university, but each time he dropped out in his 3rd year. After that, he joined the police and was an investigator himself, although not for long. Later, he opened a small workshop for repairing electrical equipment, but he failed in that field as well. Officially, he was still registered as an entrepreneur since 2003, but he didn't work anywhere. He lived with his mother and elderly uncle on the 2nd floor of an old Khrushchev-era apartment block. At first, he was questioned as a witness, and only after he suddenly got nervous and claimed to have some kind of alibi on the night of Olya's death. And the samples of his epithelial cells matched the DNA collected from the body cavities. After the murdered girl's body was found, his status was changed to that of the accused. They started gathering information about his life, social circle, habits, and tendencies. After his arrest, Chernyaev himself confessed, "I have no job, I'm living off my mother, who's a pensioner." Neighbors, a few acquaintances, and his ex-wife described Andrei negatively, portraying him as a secretive and withdrawn person. Some even said outright that in appearance he reminded them of a maniac. And this is a rare case when someone who looked like a maniac actually turned out to be one. Well, by the way, not exactly a maniac, there was only one episode, but at least a murderer.
Knife, how do you spell it? The knife was probably about 10 centimeters, an old Soviet model. What was the blade like? The blade was about this long, about 10 centimeters when it was unfolded. Well, it was this narrow, apparently, but twice as narrow. Straight, sharpened only on one side, no serrations, nothing old-fashioned.
But one of the neighbors recalled, "I never could have imagined that he was capable of taking a life." Although, of course, in hindsight it seems like he always acted like a psycho. He always wore a hood and was very withdrawn. He never talked about himself and rarely greeted anyone. He always tried to walk by as quickly as possible. You see how important it is for people, especially neighbors, especially old ladies, to be greeted. Apparently, to avoid suspicion, all you have to do is just greet everyone. The closest neighbors noticed that in the last week before his arrest, Chernyaev almost stopped going outside. Only a few people saw him during those days, either fixing the meter on the stair landing or leaving the building in his usual hoodie and sweatshirt. Andrei's personal life didn't work out. He had been divorced from his wife for a long time. His son stayed to live with his mother. The couple divorced rather quickly, because Andrei didn't have a job and was constantly short of money. It was only in court that Andrei's ex-wife revealed that he had behaved aggressively towards her as well. According to Natalia, everyone in their house was afraid of Andrei, including their son and the pets. Natalia recalled it this way: after he was fired, he did nothing. He never did anything his whole life. He didn't work, didn't support the family, that's why they got divorced. He was withdrawn and kept to himself. He was always hot-tempered. She also said that her husband had repeatedly threatened her with physical violence and even sexually assaulted her when she came to him for some reason several years after their divorce. And then he threatened to throw her out the window if she told anyone about it. Previously, Chernyaev had never been held administratively or criminally liable, meaning he had a clean record before the law and the court. But, as it turned out, he had committed other crimes as well. The prosecutor's office reported that Chernyaev committed his first crime in 1999 against his ex-wife. It was then that he first threatened to take her life, beat her severely, and started choking her. In April 2001, he brutally sexually assaulted his wife when she first mentioned divorce, and later threatened to throw her off the balcony and pour acid on her. There was another incident in the summer of 2008. Chernyaev brought a woman of easy virtue to his home, but instead of intimacy, he attacked her, beat her, sexually assaulted her, and robbed her, even taking her underwear. And after that, he kicked her out of the apartment without paying, but he could no longer be held accountable for all these crimes, as the statute of limitations had expired. Colonel of the Internal Service Valery Gorelik made the following statement after Chernyaev was caught. For 5.5 long years, the monster who committed this murder was at large, but in the end, he was identified and exposed. He also shared some information about Chernyaev's personality and behavior. By nature, he is a reserved, unsociable individual. At the moment of his arrest and search, he behaved absolutely calmly and cold-bloodedly. Until the very end, he didn't believe that the police and investigators could obtain the necessary evidence. Detectives believe that the suspect may have a tendency to commit sadistic acts of abuse. As the investigation established, Andrei Chernyaev was not acquainted with Olga Medvedeva, whom he killed. There was no intention to take a life in advance. Everything happened spontaneously. He felt like wandering around at night. He often walked like that. He saw a girl walking across the school stadium, approached her and asked something, and she supposedly responded rudely. At least that's how it seemed to Chernyaev. Then he put a knife to Olya's throat and asked her not to make any noise. After that, he pushed her down on the grass and did everything described above. However, the perpetrator couldn't remember what exactly the girl had said that was so offensive. He also didn't explain why, in addition, he brutally slashed Olya. The next day, Andrei left Yekaterinburg to work on a rotational shift, and later, when he returned, he didn't stay home for long and often left the city. That's one of the reasons why the detectives managed to catch him with such a delay. Investigator Maltsev told journalists the following. In March, investigators managed only the bare minimum, the standard set of verification procedures, including questioning him as a witness. To verify his whereabouts in 2011 to obtain a sample of skin epithelium, and also to find out whether he was willing to take a polygraph. His sample, along with hundreds of others, was sent for genetic examination. After that, it was just a matter of technique. When the genetic examination produced a match, the police began gathering additional evidence, which ultimately dismantled Chernyaev's initial alibi. On May 10th, a search was conducted in his apartment, after which Andrei was taken into custody. Chernyaev's uncle and mother moved to their country house almost immediately after his arrest. Realizing that he had finally been caught, Andrei stopped denying it any further, including when he was tested on a polygraph. However, he denied the charge of sexual abuse until the very end, although it was his semen found in Olya's vagina that allowed him to be linked to this crime. During the preliminary investigation, Chernyaev officially confessed and described in detail how he committed the crime. Here's what the investigator in charge of the case later said about it. He admitted to the charges. During the hearing on the motion for his arrest, he explained that he is a bad person and needs to be in prison. At the same time, he admits guilt for taking a life, but does not admit to the sexual abuse. He answers questions in quite some detail. He gave a confession stating that he repented, but we need to wait for the results of the forensic psychiatric examination. He also states that he did not share any information about the crime he committed with anyone. But a little later, Chernyaev was in for a big surprise from Olya. He was told that she was HIV positive and most likely infected him as well. The test results confirmed these assumptions. And when the completed criminal case was handed over to the court, the accused himself gave the investigators a surprise. He refused to testify and stated that he was not guilty. At the trial, Chernyaev did not admit guilt, and he did not testify.
I am warning Chernyaev about the inadmissibility of disrupting order in the court session. If the disruptions continue, you will be removed from the courtroom and immediately given a copy of the verdict.
He was a classic example of a socially degraded and deeply dysfunctional personality. By nature, he was extremely withdrawn, unsociable, and secretive. In fact, that's exactly how his acquaintances described him. But inside, Andrei was boiling with aggression and sadistic tendencies. Also, apparently, he had apathy and absolutely no social ambitions, but he did have pathological cruelty, which was especially evident in his attitude toward women. The diagnosis of sexual sadism indicates that he derived satisfaction from causing pain and humiliation. It might seem that Andrei was extremely hot-tempered, but apparently on the contrary he was actually quite calculating. And the suffering of the victim was part of the sexual act for him. In general, if we speak professionally and in scientific terms, Andrei Chernyaev was just bad. Well, the psychiatric evaluation found him sane. But it did diagnose him with a mental disorder, which is sexual sadism. But that didn't affect the verdict of sanity, according to the experts. Andrei was aware of the nature and consequences of his actions at the time of committing the crime. And he was also able to control his actions, considering all the circumstances of the case. The man was charged under paragraph A of part 3 of Article 131 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. Abuse of those who had not yet turned 18, to put it in the euphemistic language allowed on YouTube. And item K of part 3 of Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. Deprivation of life accompanied by abuse. Taken together, these articles provide for life imprisonment. The Leninsky District Court of Yekaterinburg, based on the investigator's petition, placed the accused in custody until July 9, 2017, and it was later extended. The entire court process was held behind closed doors, because the case involved a girl who was not yet 18. But journalists were still allowed in for the sentencing announcement. However, filming was only allowed during the sentencing announcement. Additional materials will be available on Telegram. The defendant's ex-wife was also present in the courtroom. The final verdict for Andrei Chernyaev. It was delivered only on January 30th, 2019. In the courtroom, Andrei behaved extremely provocatively. He claimed that the criminal case was fabricated. He criticized the authorities, the government, and the entire judicial system. As a result, by order of the judges, the bailiffs escorted him out. This is what he said: "You have no right to judge me. I am not familiar with the case materials. My right to a defense has been violated. The criminal case reached the court in an altered form. There has been official forgery and falsification. The civil war will start soon. You will answer for everything. For taking the life of Olga Medvedeva, Andrei Chernyaev. Sentenced to 19 years of imprisonment, and in total, together with the punishment for desecration, to 24 years and additionally 2 years of restriction of liberty." At the same time, Chernyaev was supposed to serve the first 8 years of his sentence in prison. Only after that would he be transferred to a high-security penal colony. The prosecution requested 25 years in a high-security facility. The position of the prosecutor's office was explained by Olga Vdovina. Chernyaev was given a sentence close to the maximum limit. For now, the prosecutor's office has no grounds for appeal. The relatives of the late Olya did not express any objections to the verdict. His ex-wife was satisfied with the punishment for her former husband. He got what he deserved, she told reporters briefly. And Chernyaev himself tried unsuccessfully for many years to appeal the verdict, including before the Supreme Court, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. He is still in a high-security prison. That's all for now. Leave your comments, like or dislike, and check out other videos on the channel. They come out even if you don't always get notified about them.